Okay. No? Who said no? You need a hug.
Yeah.
Hey, I don't give hugs, but somebody give her a hug, will you? Okay. Okay, everybody wants to hug them. Okay.
No, I just made it worse.
I'm sorry.
Thanks.
Oh, sorry.
I needed a handshake. What?
You need what?
No, she offered me a handshake.
Oh.
I need a handshake.
How about a...
Hard no. Oh, yeah.
All right. Boom. Okay, your day's looking up for a calculus class.
Okay,
All right. Here's some homework going around. I don't know. I guess I must have just forgot the test for this kind of deal. More importantly, the test. So, we'll do test corrections. Everybody kind of has different amounts of test corrections to do, different learning. So we'll kind of finish at all different points there. But once I feel like most people are starting to get done, we'll go over questions on 8, 9, and 10. Last class, all we got through was 8 and 9. Tonight's homework, it's just practice on stuff that we've been doing in the last week. I forgot to put on practice on integration by parts the first time, so there are 4 on the back that will practice integration by parts. So there's no lesson per se, it's just stuff you've been doing recently and hopefully it'll go there. Okay? So with test corrections in mind, would you first, in terms of test security, would you put away your phones? And I will pause this. No. Start recording. All right. 11 on homework 8. What was that one? That was
3.7, 30.
30. Oh, yes. Okay. You're right. I bailed. I can't remember. Somebody interrupted me, I bet. It's somebody's fault. That's what for sure. There's a rectangle in here. The radius, I usually have an easier time if they give me a numerical radius, but it's fine. The idea is to optimize the area of the rectangle, which is 2xy. Do we agree there? The relationship between the variables is that y is the square root of r squared minus x squared. Do you agree with that? And that the area then is 2x root r squared minus x squared. The derivative gets a little gross, but thankfully you guys are really good with your skills and technique, and so you probably did okay. First stays the same, derivative of that second. I will say this, there's a bit of a gotcha here. This is 1/2 comes down, reduce it to the negative 1/2, but the chain rule part of this, when you do the derivative on this, are those both variables? No. Yeah, r's a constant. I don't know what the constant is, but once they decide on r, it's a constant. So the derivative on that is not 2r minus 2x. It's just negative 2x, okay? Plus, derivative of the first is 2 root r squared minus x squared. I don't know if I'm getting to the place where I stop. I got a common denominator. 2 divides out. So this has the common denominator. It's negative 2x squared. But this guy, the common denominator, if I multiply by that over itself, which is mathematically allowed, that's 1. Identity property of multiplication. Then I get 2 normal r squared minus x squared over root r squared minus x squared. Really? I want to know where this is 0 or undefined in a second once I get this cleaned up. So I have something like 2r squared minus 4x squared. That doesn't look familiar, is that right? Okay. 0 or undefined. I think this is undefined if x equals r. That makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. But in terms of the picture, if x equals r, then what kind of rectangle do I have? It's x is all the way to this point, so my rectangle looks like that. Now that says that's a critical number, but that's not a max. That's a min. That's the least area I can get, not the most area I can get. So I'm going to focus instead on the 2r squared minus 4x squared equal to 0 component. Solve that. That'll be a max, and you can verify that if you choose. All right? Any other questions on reviewing? Review now? Review 9. Was there something I wanted to talk about first? Yeah. So I had a GABA question on the Washington Monument problem, box 7. And the car catches the truck problem, box 8. But if that's not you, that's fine. I don't have to do those. You can leave them.
Yeah, I didn't understand how to start.
Okay, let me just say this. I am not Mr. McKellar's, as you can no doubt tell from my little weaselly voice instead of his manly booming voice, yeah? Nor is this physics. So I should see calculus in these boxes, not physics. General rule of thumb is if you have a delta anywhere in there, you're doing physics. You're not doing calculus. Okay? Calculus is not delta x over delta t. That's actually algebraic physics, average rates of change. We're doing calculus here. That's not delta x over delta t. That's dx over dt, infinitesimals, all right? So again, not physics. So what I would like to see, for example, number 7, how hard would you have to propel something to clear the Washington Monument starting at ground level? Really? You don't have to redo this, but in terms of what I want to see, in such a problem, in motion due to gravity, I would expect you to not go straight to, I know that B is negative 1/2 G over 2, blah, 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 V initial. No. I understand you worked hard for that physics knowledge, but leave it at the door instead. Start with acceleration due to gravity, which is, in feet, negative in feet. Negative 32 feet per second per second. And instead of writing the velocity equation, develop the velocity equation via calculus. What's the calculus relationship to acceleration? Antiderivative of acceleration. So that means the velocity is negative 32t plus a first constant of a few times. To find that constant, I need an initial condition. Do you have a time velocity condition given? Not really. That's kind of the question. I do know that at time 0, the velocity can be thought of as initial velocity. So rather than C1, I'm going to call that V initial. All right? That's good. I have a velocity equation. I also need a height equation. Again, not through memorization, but through calculus. How do I get a height equation? Antiderivative of velocity. The antiderivative of negative 32t plus V initial. Pause real quick. That you could think of as, or call it a differential, or the variable of integration, dt. You see that? On the AP test, they do not grade for that. I grade for that. I absolutely will take off if you ever integrate anything without the variable of integration. I will take off. Every professor I ever had would nail you for that. That is terrible math to not have the variable of integration. Make sure that you include it. With me? Okay, so what is the antiderivative of negative 32t? Negative 16t squared plus V initial t plus, I can't read my own writing, but I know what it's supposed to be, plus C2. Do you have an initial condition for the height? Yes, the key words in the problem are ground level. It's thrown from ground level, and that means the height is 0 at time 0, implying that C2 is 0. So my height equation is that. Now then, we're finally ready to get into the question. It says, clearing the Washington Monument. Now that really means I need to figure out what does V initial have to be in order to make this 15, or 550. But I don't know the t. That's a lot of unknowns. Now here's V initial, but it doesn't really have the height in it. So what do I do? Well, use them both. Tell me, at this point at that top, do you know the time?
No.
I don't either. Do you know the velocity? 0. And the height? 550. Now using that element in those two equations gets you rolling. You know that this should become 0 at that point where it reaches its max, you could say T max or use a subscript. I didn't, but I guess I could. Likewise, this would become 550 at that instant. It's at the peak. Now I have two equations, two unknowns. Does that get you rolling? Yeah, you could probably use substitution. Best V initial is 32T. So if you take that and substitute it into the other equation, you get 550 equals negative 16T squared plus 32T squared. 16T squared equals 550. You see what it's saying. You with me? Do you want to talk about the one next to that, the car catches the truck problem?
Yes.
Yeah, that was a tough one. If you don't have the skill of talking to yourself in your math toolkit, problem-solving toolkit, you need to develop that. It's the best skill to have. Talk to yourself a lot, and then answer your own questions. My thought process that I went through looked like this. I didn't know what to make of this. I had never done a problem like this before. At the instant the traffic light turns green, the automobile waiting, blah, 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 catches up to the truck later. I went to the question after reading it. How far beyond the starting point will the automobile overtake the truck? Okay, well, I thought, well, I know this is position, velocity, and acceleration. It's got that in it, right? If I want to know when the car reaches the truck, what is that about? Velocity, position, or acceleration? If the car and the truck are going to be at the same point, position, I need to talk position, right? So I thought, oh, okay, so I need to figure out what is the position of the car, which I used S, but you could use P or X, whatever, equals the position of the truck. All right, well, to make that happen, I need position of the car. Can you tell me something about the car's movement? What's given to you? The acceleration of the car. All right, so the acceleration of the car is 6, if I recall. And it's in meters per second. What is it? Feet per second per second. Okay? So can you get me position from it? All right, antiderivative of acceleration would give you velocity of the car. So that would be 6t plus an initial condition. Do you have an initial condition or velocity at some time? At the starting point, the car is moving or not moving? Not moving, so that implies that the velocity of the car is just straight up 6t. Now let's go to position. Position, S of C, is the antiderivative velocity with respect to time. And so that would be 3t squared plus some other constant. Do you have a position condition? An initial position condition? That's what it is. I guess it's relative. What do you want to call position? What do you want to call? You have to figure out some kind of origin, yeah? This is where you get to say, well, it depends on who's defining your axis stuff, which I normally hate. But can we just define the origin as where the intersection is? Are we okay with this? Mm-hmm. Okay. And if you want to draw a little picture, that's even more. That's terrible. But let the position at time 0 be 0. The car is at the intersection at time 0, so that implies, finally, that the position of the car is 3t squared.
Is that the same for the top, like why the C1 dropped out?
Yeah, at time 0,
More
velocity of the car was 0.
today
Yes.
to the Jaguar for
Thank you. You're right, it wasn't called.
after the bell. And a reminder that 8th graders are going to report to the hour, and then we'll call them down to the auditorium in groups.
Okay, so the truck gives you a little different starting point. They give you the velocity of the truck, so you could integrate the velocity only and get that the position is 30t plus some third constant, I guess. But again, the truck is right at the intersection at time 0, so it also goes 0. So the truck position is 30t. So if I set these two equal to each other, 3t squared equals 32. 3t squared minus 30t therefore equals 0. 3t times 2 minus 10 equals 0. So they're actually at the same position twice. Why is that? When is that?
When they first pass each other.
Yeah, right when the light turns green, they're at the intersection together. So that's why times 0. But time 10 is when the truck zooms ahead at the start, but the car accelerates and eventually catches up. So that's where the 10 seconds comes along. And then I think after that, you're probably able to answer the questions pretty well. Does that make sense? Yes? 30? Oh! Okay, so the question wasn't time. If I recall, the question is the position when the car caught up. And so I actually have to find, I know the car catches up at 10, but the position at 10 is, did I say 30? Should it be 300 then? Oh, so if I said 30, I did make a mistake. It's 300. Yeah, my bad. Sorry. 300 feet. Sorry about that. 300. Okay. And then the close. Any other questions on review 9?
Number 4, I just wasn't, it said remember your identities and I was,
And you did.
I wasn't totally sure.
Okay. So the idea was 1 plus tangent squared y. And this was kind of fun because if you looked at the answer, you guys didn't have the answer. The answer to this is tangent y. And so you think, how could the antiderivative of that be there? But it's, what's the identity for 1 plus tangent? Remember, it's normally sine squared plus cosine squared is 1. The tangent identity comes from if you divide this by cosine squared. To help you remember, so the identity muon is tangent squared plus 1 equals secant squared. So with that said, this whole thing is equal to secant squared. And you say, well, shoot, that's the derivative of tangent. So that's what actually does. Does that make sense? Okay, let me know if you have anything else. Make sure I get 8 and 9 today. 10 is not due today. We'll do it tomorrow. At your desk, right? Yes.
Yeah.
So it really amounts to what you call, you read either way, you can say what it's really yellow. So you could call you sine or cosine. So if we do that, then you get something that looks different. So look it up and do to say like this,
And that makes sense because the height is x, and the length is on that.
I did it.
Yeah.
And the width. This.
Oh, 9?
That's what he had.
then I get that.
I know, well, I said someone no.
I didn't know that was.
Skip the last. I don't understand what he's talking about.
Yeah, I don't remember here.
Well, that just means the concept.
Oh, error. Yes, I found it. Still getting it. I was like,
Any tests back, please. Don't take your test.
well, click it.
Yes, I should have talked about
Oh, because like sine
Thank you.
or something is positive.
I'll get your test.
That's ridiculous sense.
I literally just made up one.
Grace, can I get your test?
I'm like, I don't think so.
Okay. Oh,
Sorry,
yes.
like you said it was there.
Thank you.
I can explain the difference. They're opposite different.
Yeah.
Because
So
what
this
you
is
say is
this is great. So it's by virtue of the constant. When you integrate, this is one constant, and this is a different constant. Now, how could it be different? Well, if you think about this, I know that sine squared is the same as 1
Pretty sure.
Yeah, and so if I then distribute, I would get 1/2 minus 1/2 cosine squared y equals 10 plus y. Now, as far as how these can coincide then, C2. So that's how, I mean, they can be shown to be the same just by the change. Oh, yeah. I knew there was one more one.
The C and these two are areas that I just were
These, I didn't teach differential, so I don't know why it's in there. This is, so this is really cool. Explain here. It's in the table and which one is C is sine. So you have this equation where you have 25 here.
Oh my God, I'm getting so confused. He's something I've ever done in my life.
Now, if I solve this y1 and this
It doesn't work.
it
doesn't work.
All my work was right. I did exactly what you were
Yeah,
doing.
yeah.
But then instead of, I just wrote the equation and I said, my math is just all. But whatever.
I don't know.
So in terms of
This is what's screwed up.
and I want to
What is
know
that? Is that 10?
well, what region
Oh,
of
no.
air is less than 0.01.
So you get like the critical points, right? You get that, right? And so there's
And
supposed to
the
be
air
a
is
maximum,
going to be
right?
Yeah.
because that's where that makes sense because that's close to.
It's a, I want to put it in my
You
calculator.
can find that.
So you did your middle?
Or
I will check it, but sometimes even my calculator.
Okay, let's see if you negative 10.
Okay.
I'll be positive. That's negative. That's negative.
all right, and I forgot to stop this again.
Wait.